My name is Serafina, and for most of my 28 years, I felt like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Colors bled, my edges blurred, until I was little more than a suggestion of a person. I grew up in Port Blossom, a city that prides itself on its maritime history and its perfectly preserved Victorian homes, their facades painted in pastel shades that belie the complicated lives lived within. Our family, the Ashworths, was one of the city's cornerstones. My father, Julian Ashworth, was the man behind Ashworth Heritage Developments, a company that didn't just build houses but restored the city's soul, or so the local magazine profiles always said. He was a master of appearances, a sculptor of public perception. I work as an archivist for the city's historical society, a quiet job in a hushed, dusty building downtown. I spend my days with letters written in faded ink and photographs of lives long past, finding solace in the tangible, honest weight of history. It's a world away from the one my father built, a world of grand gestures and carefully staged realities. My existence was a quiet counterpoint to his booming narrative, a footnote in the story of him and my sister, Isabel, the radiant, accomplished daughter who reflected his ambition back at him with dazzling light. I was the shadow she cast. The air in our family home on Saltonstall Lane always felt different, thinner, harder to breathe. It was a beautiful house, featured more than once in architectural digests, with wisteria clinging to the stone walls and a garden that spilled over with roses my mother, Genevieve, tended with a surgical precision. Everything was arranged just so, a permanent stage set for the performance of our lives. The performance that evening was for my father's 60th birthday. The dining room was aglow, the long mahogany table a gleaming dark river reflecting the candlelight. Crystal glasses, so delicate they seemed to hum with tension, stood like sentinels beside embossed china. This was my father's domain, and we were all just players in his production. Relatives had been flown in from across the country, not because he cherished their company, but because he cherished their admiration. I arrived last, a habit I developed not out of disrespect, but self-preservation. Less time on stage meant fewer chances to miss a cue. As I slipped into the dining room, my mother caught my eye. Her smile was a masterpiece of social grace, tight and immaculate, but her eyes sent a clear message. "Serafina, darling, you're here." She glided over and adjusted the collar of my silk blouse, her fingers cool and brief. "Try to engage tonight. Your Uncle Marcus is asking about you." Her whisper was a gentle chisel, chipping away at my composure. "Smile. It's your father's night." Dinner began as it always did, with the Julian Ashworth show. He sat at the head of the table, a benevolent king surveying his court, a glass of deep red wine held aloft. He told stories polished smooth from countless retellings, each one burnishing his legend. He spoke of a business deal closed with a handshake and a flash of intuition, of a donation that saved a local landmark, of Isabel's recent promotion at the law firm. The relatives laughed at the right moments, their faces upturned and adoring. Cameras, mostly on phones, flashed intermittently, capturing the tableau of familial devotion. I felt myself receding, becoming part of the floral centerpiece, decorative and silent. I answered the few questions directed my way with quiet, brief responses, which invariably served as a launching pad for my father to redirect the conversation back to himself or Isabel. It was during dessert, a rich raspberry torte my mother had ordered from the finest patisserie in town, that my Uncle Marcus, a kind but oblivious man, turned to me. "Serafina, you've been so quiet all evening. Cat got your tongue." My father laughed, a sound that was more performance than pleasure. "Oh, Serafina's always been more of an observer," he said, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "She lives in her books, don't you, darling? More comfortable with the dead than the living." A few polite, uncertain chuckles rippled around the table. I felt a familiar heat creep up my neck. I offered a small, non-committal smile, hoping the moment would pass. But my father wasn't finished. He was playing to his audience, and he'd just found his prop. He picked up his dessert fork, scooping a dollop of whipped cream and a single, perfect raspberry from his plate. You know, you're right, Marcus. She's looking a bit pale. A bit serious. He leaned across the table toward me, his movements slow and theatrical. We can't have that. It's a celebration. My body went rigid. I knew this prelude, the playful glint in his eye that meant a boundary was about to be crossed, a small cruelty disguised as a joke. I wanted to lean back, to say, don't, but the word was a stone in my throat. The eyes of 20 people were on us. My mother watched, her expression unreadable, a porcelain mask. Before I could react, his hand was in front of my face. With a flourish, he gently but deliberately smeared the cream and raspberry across my cheek. There, he announced to the room, his voice booming with false cheer. A touch of color. A little sweetness to brighten that sour face. The room erupted. Not in gasps, but in laughter. It wasn't the sound of shock, it was the sound of complicity. It was the laughter of people who knew the rules of this family. Julian was the star, and anything he did in jest was to be accepted as such. My cousin Finn, only 16, had his phone up, recording, a wide grin on his face. My Aunt Diana tittered behind her hand. Isabel shot me a look that was a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if my silent humiliation were an inconvenience to her. I sat there, frozen, the cold, sticky cream on my skin feeling like a brand. I could smell the sweet, cloying scent of the raspberry. My face burned, a fire of shame that felt hot enough to melt stone. But I did not cry. Crying was weakness, and my father fed on weakness. I slowly picked up my linen napkin and, with hands that I willed to be steady, wiped the dessert from my cheek. I saw the faint red stain it left on the white cloth, a tiny flag of surrender. My father sat back, pleased with himself, the punchline delivered, the audience satisfied. He turned to Uncle Marcus. She's always been so sensitive. Can't take a bit of teasing. I looked down at my plate, at the mangled remains of my own tort. Each bite I had taken now tasted of humiliation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow conversation. I felt the lingering stares, heard the whispered asides. I was no longer Serafina, I was the girl with the raspberry on her face, the butt of the family joke. Later, as my father and Isabel posed for more photos by the grand fireplace, I excused myself. In the cool marble of the downstairs bathroom, I leaned against the sink, the gold-plated swan-shaped faucets cold beneath my palms. I looked at my reflection in the ornate mirror. My face was flushed, my eyes overly bright, but my expression was unnervingly calm. The tight knot of hurt in my chest was beginning to unravel, replaced by something else, something cold and clear as ice. It wasn't anger, not the hot, explosive kind. It was a profound and quiet sense of certainty. I had spent my entire life absorbing these small, casual cruelties, letting them soak into me until I couldn't tell where I ended and the hurt began. I had accepted my role as the family's quiet disappointment, the gentle shadow. But standing there, seeing the faint pink smear the napkin hadn't quite erased, I understood that my silence had been mistaken for acceptance. It had been read as permission. And in that moment, the archivist in me woke up. The part of me that understood the power of a record, of a primary source. Finn's phone. Aunt Diana's giggles. The smiling, complicit faces. They hadn't just witnessed an event, they had documented it. My father, a man who lived and died by the image he projected, had just handed me the one thing that could dismantle it. Not with a shout, but with a simple, undeniable showing of the truth. When I walked back into the living room, my expression was serene. I even managed a small, genuine smile. It wasn't a smile of forgiveness or of happiness. It was the smile of a person who had just found a map out of a labyrinth she didn't even realize she was trapped in. The performance was not over. It had simply entered its final, unwritten act. The days that followed were steeped in a strange calm. I went to work, my hands carefully handling century-old documents, the scent of old paper a comforting balm. The world within the historical society was ordered, logical. A fact was a fact. A date was a date. The truth was preserved in ink and silver nitrate, immutable. This clarity stood in stark contrast to the fluid, manipulative reality of my family life. The memory of the dinner party wasn't a fading echo, it was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days. I didn't feel vengeful. Instead, I felt a deep, aching need for the truth to simply exist, to be seen for what it was, stripped of the guise of humor. My father's joke wasn't the disease, it was a symptom of a sickness that had run through our family for as long as I could remember. The casual disregard for my feelings, the subtle belittling, the constant reinforcement of my place in the family hierarchy. My first step was a text message to my cousin Finn. I kept it light. "Hey Finn, that was some party Saturday night. My dad is such a character. Do you happen to have that video of his little dessert prank? I'd love to have it for the family archives." The word archives felt right. I was curating a collection after all. Finn, oblivious and ever eager to share his digital exploits, replied almost instantly. "Totally. It was hilarious. Sending it now." A moment later, the video file appeared in my inbox. I watched it once, my stomach clenching. The camera was shaky, but the audio was horribly clear. My father's booming voice, a little sweetness to brighten that sour face, followed by the chorus of laughter. My own face, a mask of stunned stillness. The lens lingered on me for a moment too long, a silent, unwilling subject of a spectacle. I saved the file to a secure folder on my laptop. Next, I called my Aunt Diana. I feigned a lighthearted tone, the one I always used to navigate tricky family conversations. "Aunt Diana, it was so lovely to see you. I was just telling a friend about Dad's little stunt with the raspberry tort, and she couldn't believe it. You wouldn't happen to have a picture, would you? It's all such a blur." "Oh, of course, dear," she said, her voice dripping with the false sympathy she mistook for kindness. "I have a few shots. Your father, he's just too much. Such a joker." She sent me 3 photos. One caught the moment just before, my father leaning in with the fork, a predatory gleam in his eyes. The second showed the smear on my cheek, my own expression unreadable. The third, and most damning, captured the wider table. My mother, Genevieve, was lifting her wine glass, a faint, resigned smile on her lips, her eyes not on me, but on my father, as if to say, "Well, that's Julian for you." It was a portrait of her complicity, her silent endorsement. The pieces were coming together, not for a trial, but for a testament. I spent my evenings after work in the quiet of my small apartment overlooking the harbor, the foghorns moaning in the distance. I began to assemble a narrative. Using a simple editing software, I wove the clips and photos together. I started the sequence not with the humiliation, but with the performance. I found a video on my uncle's social media page from earlier in the evening, my father giving a toast. "To family," he said, his voice rich with sincerity. "The bedrock of our lives. A sanctuary where we are loved, respected, and always, always safe." I let his words hang in the air, then I cut to the shaky phone footage of the raspberry incident. The contrast was jarring. After the clip of my stunned face, I inserted a still photo of my mother's placid smile. Then I layered in other memories, fragments of a lifetime of similar moments. A clip from Isabel's college graduation party 5 years ago, where my father, giving a speech, had said, "We are so proud of Isabel, our brilliant star. And Serafina is here too." The dismissive afterthought met with a few sympathetic titters. A photo from a family vacation where he'd playfully pushed me into the pool, ruining a new dress, and laughed when I surfaced, sputtering and embarrassed. Each piece was a small, seemingly insignificant slight on its own. The kind of thing I was told I was too sensitive about. The kind of thing I was meant to forget. But woven together, they formed a tapestry of casual cruelty, a pattern of emotional erosion that was impossible to ignore. I wasn't creating a fiction. I was an archivist assembling a finding aid for my own life, making sense of the scattered, painful artifacts. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later. An email from the Port Blossom Heritage Society arrived in my inbox, a generic announcement for their annual gala. This year, the guest of honor, the recipient of the prestigious Patron of History award, was to be Julian Ashworth, for his unwavering commitment to preserving the integrity and character of our beloved city. I read the announcement, and a cold, calm wave washed over me. It was perfect. The stage was grander than our dining room, the audience more influential than our extended family. This was the world he curated so carefully, the audience whose admiration he craved above all else. They would see his performance, his carefully constructed persona. And then, they would see the archives. I didn't feel a thrill of revenge. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. It felt like a necessary surgery, a painful procedure to remove something that had been poisoning me from the inside out. I RSVP'd to the event, my fingers steady on the keyboard. For days, I rehearsed my part. Not what I would say, but what I would do. It required silence, precision, and a deep, steady breath. In my quiet apartment, with the video file saved on a small, unassuming USB drive, I prepared to bring the truth out of the archives and into the light. The night of the Port Blossom Heritage Society Gala, the grand ballroom of the historic Regent Hotel was shimmering. Chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of the city's elite. I moved through the crowd feeling like a ghost, invisible in a simple, dark blue dress. I was not there to be seen. I was there to bear witness. My father was in his element, a magnate holding court. He moved from group to group, a hand on his shoulder here, a booming laugh there. My mother stood beside him, a regal statue in emerald silk, her smile unwavering. Isabel was there too, flitting between conversations, her laughter bright and easy. They were the perfect family, a portrait of success and unity. When my father saw me, he beckoned me over. "Serafina." "There you are," he said, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders. "Everyone, this is my other daughter, the quiet one. Our little historian." He said it with a proprietary pride, as if my quietness were a charming eccentricity he had personally curated. I smiled a thin, neutral smile and endured the pleasantries, my heart a steady, slow drum against my ribs. In my small evening bag, the USB drive felt as heavy as a stone. The tribute portion of the evening was scheduled to begin after dinner. A large projector screen was set up at the front of the ballroom. A young, slightly frazzled technician was testing the equipment. During a lull in the conversation, while my family was occupied with the mayor, I made my way to the technician's table. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I'm Serafina Ashworth. My father is being honored tonight." The technician, a young man named Liam according to his name tag, looked up. "Oh, right. Congratulations to him." "Thank you. There's a short family tribute video that's supposed to be part of the presentation. My sister was meant to give it to you, but I think she forgot. Would it be all right if I just loaded it for you? It's all set to go." I held up the USB drive. My voice was calm, my demeanor unassuming. I was the quiet daughter, the helpful one. No one would question me. "Oh, sure. No problem," he said, gesturing to the laptop. "Just plug it in there. The presentation file is on the desktop. You can just drop yours in." In less than a minute, it was done. I renamed my file to match the original tribute Isabel had prepared and moved her file to a temporary folder. It was a simple, digital sleight of hand. I thanked Liam, my smile never wavering, and melted back into the crowd. My pulse was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my chest, but on the outside, I was a placid lake. I found a seat at a table near the back, partially obscured by a potted palm, giving me a clear view of the screen and of my family's table at the front. The dinner plates were cleared, champagne was poured, and the lights began to dim. The president of the Heritage Society took the stage and began a glowing introduction, extolling my father's virtues, his vision, his generosity. "Julian Ashworth is more than a developer," she gushed. "He is a guardian of our city's soul, a man who understands that a community, like a family, is built on a foundation of respect, integrity, and care." I watched my father at the front table. He was beaming, basking in the warm glow of public adoration. This was his oxygen. He patted my mother's hand, the picture of a proud, humble patriarch. And now, the president continued, to kick off our tribute, his family has prepared a short video to share a more personal glimpse of the man we're all here to honor. A hush fell over the ballroom. The screen flickered to life. It began exactly as I had designed it, with the clip of my father's toast from his birthday party. His rich, confident voice filled the room. To family, a sanctuary where we are loved, respected, and always, always safe. Heads nodded in the audience. My mother smiled, a soft, proud expression on her face. Then, the image dissolved. The shaky, poorly lit footage from my cousin Finn's phone filled the massive screen. The sound was jarringly clear. My father's voice, amplified now for hundreds to hear, a little sweetness to brighten that sour face. A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. On screen, the slow, deliberate smear of dessert across my cheek was grotesque in its magnified detail. The ensuing laughter from our family felt obscene, echoing in the vast, silent room. I could see my father lean forward, his smile frozen, confusion clouding his eyes. My mother's hand flew to her throat. The video cut to the still photo of my mother, sipping her wine with that look of placid resignation. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Then came the clip from Isabel's graduation. And Serafina is here too. The dismissive words, so much more damning on a massive screen. Then the vacation photo of me, drenched and humiliated, beside the pool. Between each clip, I had inserted simple, white text on a black screen. Respect. Integrity. Care. The words hung in the silent room, a stark, brutal indictment. The audience was no longer watching a tribute, they were witnesses to a character assassination, but the weapon was the man's own words, his own actions. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The whispers grew louder. I saw Mr. Sterling, my father's oldest business partner, staring at the screen with a look of profound distaste. The mayor's wife had her hand over her mouth. The final sequence was a slow-motion replay of the raspberry incident, this time with no sound, just the clinical, horrifying visuals of a father's casual cruelty towards his daughter. Then, the screen faded to black. The final words appeared, the ones I had recorded myself whispering into my phone's camera in the bathroom that night, my voice quiet, but steady, now amplified for the entire room to hear. This is what family looks like in our house. The screen went dark. The house lights came up, flooding the room in a merciless glare. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a thick, heavy blanket of judgment and shock. No one clapped. No one spoke. For a full 10 seconds, the entire room was frozen. Then the spell broke. A man at a nearby table stood up and, without a word, walked out. His wife followed. A quiet exodus began. The whispers turned into a buzz of conversation. My father was on his feet, his face a mottled mask of fury and disbelief. He looked from the blank screen to the departing guests, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. My mother was pale as bone, her eyes locked on me from across the room. Her expression was not one of anger, but of sheer, unadulterated horror. Isabel was staring at me, her face a storm of betrayal and rage. "How could you?" she mouthed, her beautiful face twisted into a snarl. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I picked up my small bag and, without looking at my family again, I walked toward the exit. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel their judgment. I felt only the clean, sharp air of freedom. As I pushed open the heavy ballroom doors, I heard my father's voice finally break through the noise, a desperate, blustering attempt at damage control. A misunderstanding, a family joke taken out of context. But no one was listening. They had seen the context. They had seen the raw footage from the archives. The performance was over, and the truth, in all its quiet, devastating clarity, had finally taken the stage. I stepped out into the cool, damp night air of Port Blossom. The scent of the sea and the distant cry of a gull felt like a welcome home. I didn't look back. I just started walking, my steps even and sure, into the rest of my life. The weeks that followed were a study in silence. A barrage of calls from my father, which went to voicemail. A string of increasingly furious, then pleading, texts from Isabel, which I read but did not answer. A single, 3-word text from my mother: "You broke us." I didn't feel broken. For the first time, I felt whole. The world didn't end. The local news ran a small, discreet story about Julian Ashworth's abrupt departure from the Heritage Society Board. Rumors swirled through Port Blossom's tight-knit social circles, the story of the gala becoming a local legend, told in hushed tones over coffee and cocktails. The public image my father had spent a lifetime sculpting had cracked, revealing the flawed material beneath. I continued my work at the archives, the quiet rhythm of my days a soothing anchor. My colleagues treated me with a new, gentle respect, as if they saw me more clearly now. I found my own voice, not in a loud declaration, but in small, steady assertions of self. I spoke up in meetings. I took on a project I'd been too timid to volunteer for before. I started painting again, filling small canvases with the soft, muted colors of the Port Blossom coast, no longer a watercolor left in the rain, but a deliberate composition of my own making. One misty Saturday morning, about a month after the gala, I was at the city market, buying fresh flowers and bread. As I stood admiring a bucket of pale pink peonies, I heard a tentative voice say my name. "Serafina." I turned. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the armor of social grace she always wore. Her face was bare of makeup, and there were lines around her eyes I'd never noticed before. We stood in silence for a moment, the bustling market a world away. I come here for the bread," she said, her voice thin. "It's the only place that makes it the way your father likes. The mention of him was a ghost between us." I simply nodded, holding my bouquet of peonies. Her eyes filled with a complicated sorrow. "What you did," she began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "It was a terrible, cruel thing to do to your father." I met her gaze, and for the first time, I felt no need to defend myself, no urge to apologize for the space I had taken up. "What he did to me, for my entire life," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "was also a cruel thing. You were there. You watched it all." A tear traced a path down her cheek. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "It's just who he is." "I know," I said, and the words were filled not with anger, but with a deep, weary understanding. "But it's not who I am. And I can't live in that story anymore." She looked at the peonies in my hands, their soft, layered petals so full of life. It was as if she were seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time, not as a supporting character, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person with her own story to tell. She didn't offer an apology, and I didn't ask for one. Some fractures are too deep to ever fully mend. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice barely audible. "Yes," I replied. "They are." She gave a small, defeated nod and turned, disappearing back into the crowd of the market, on her way to buy bread for a man whose world had shrunk to the size of his own home. I watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, aching peace. I carried my flowers home to my small apartment by the sea. I arranged them in a simple glass vase and placed them in the center of my table, where they caught the soft morning light. Their gentle, resilient beauty filled the room. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of possibility. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time, I felt ready to pick up the pen and write my own history, in my own hand, with my own true voice.